Good evening and welcome to Bedtime Sleep Story. Tonight, let us travel back together, far beyond cities and kingdoms, beyond pyramids and written words, to the long, quiet dawn of our own kind. This is the story of the first humans, of small bands gathered around the earliest fires, of hands learning to shape stone, of footprints pressed into soft ash beneath enormous skies. We will wander with them across grasslands and along ancient shores, watch them paint by flickering light deep in the earth, and follow them as they spread slowly and bravely to nearly every corner of the world. There is nothing here to hurry for. All of it happened so very long ago, and every one of these people has long since found their rest. So let it drift over you gently, like warmth from a low fire on a cold night. If these quiet journeys help you rest, a gentle like or a follow lets other tired minds find a softer place to land too. But for now, there's nothing you need to do. Loosen your shoulders, let your eyes grow heavy, and let the long day fall away. And as the first stars appear over the ancient plains, let us begin. The story of the first humans stretches back almost unimaginably far. Long before any village or field, our distant ancestors were already walking the earth, and the full tale of our kind reaches back not thousands, but millions of years. Across that vast stretch of time, change came slowly, so slowly that no one alive ever noticed it. Bodies shifting shape over countless generations, hands growing more nimble, minds growing more curious. The people of any single lifetime simply lived, raised their children, and passed on what they knew, never guessing they were part of so long a journey. We are the latest to carry that inheritance forward. When we look up at the same moon they watched, we are joined to them across an almost endless span of nights. Their story is the first and longest chapter of our own, unfolding patiently, like a river finding its way to the sea across an entire age of the world. Walking upright was one of the very first things that set our ancestors apart. Long before large brains or fine tools, our early forebears rose onto two legs and walked across the open land. This freed their hands for carrying food, holding infants, and one day shaping tools, and it let them see farther across the tall grass and travel long distances without tiring. We know they walked this way from astonishing evidence: a trail of footprints, pressed into soft volcanic ash millions of years ago, and hardened by time, where two or three individuals strolled side by side, one perhaps pausing to glance to the side. Across all those ages, we can still see the gentle rhythm of their steps, the spacing of a walk much like our own. To stand upright and walk into the distance is among the oldest of human habits, older than fire, older than speech, older than memory itself. Lucy is one of the most famous of our ancient ancestors. In the dry hills of Ethiopia, researchers uncovered the remarkably complete skeleton of a small female who lived more than 3 million years ago, and they gave her the name Lucy. She stood only a little over a meter tall, with a small head but legs and hips already shaped for walking upright, a gentle blend of the ancient and the familiar. From her bones, we learned that our ancestors walked on 2 feet long before their brains grew large, overturning what many had assumed. Lucy was not quite like us, yet she was part of our family, a distant grandmother glimpsed across the ages. Her discovery brought the deep human past suddenly close and real. To picture her moving through an ancient woodland, small and watchful beneath the trees, is to meet one of the first faces in the long, quiet portrait gallery of our kind. The control of fire was perhaps the greatest gift the first humans ever gave themselves. At some point deep in the past, our ancestors learned not only to use fire when they found it, but to keep it, tend it, and carry it from place to place. A fire warmed them through cold nights, kept dangerous animals at a distance, and turned the dark from a thing to fear into a circle of safety. Around it, the band could gather close, share food, and stay awake together a little longer, talking softly while the world slept beyond the light. Fire let them move into colder lands and survive seasons that would once have killed them. The hearth became the heart of human life, as it still is. To imagine the very first people sitting around their flames, faces glowing, shadows dancing on the rocks behind them, is to see the gentle beginning of home itself. Cooking food may have helped give the first humans their large brains. Once our ancestors began to cook over their fires, everything changed. Cooking softened tough roots and meat, killed many dangers hidden in raw food, and released far more energy from each meal than chewing alone ever could. With more nourishment more easily gained, the body could afford to grow and feed a larger, hungrier brain, the most energy-demanding organ we have. Cooking also meant less time, spent chewing through long, hard hours, freeing the day for other things, making tools, raising children, simply being together. Some scientists believe this gentle revolution at the hearth was one of the keys that unlocked the human mind. It is a quiet and homely thought that the warm shared meal, the oldest of comforts, may also be part of what made us who we are, simmering slowly in the firelight at the very dawn of our kind. The first tools were simple stones, chipped to a useful edge. Among the oldest things our ancestors made were sharp flakes of stone, struck from larger rocks with careful blows. A good edge could cut meat from a carcass, scrape a hide, or split a bone to reach the rich marrow within. Making them took real skill, an understanding of how stone breaks, and an eye for the right rock. Knowledge passed patiently from hand to hand. These humble tools, scattered now across ancient sites by the thousand, are the first clear signs of the human habit of shaping the world to our needs. Holding one, even today, one can feel exactly where ancient fingers gripped it. They are the beginning of all technology, every machine and tool that followed. From a single sharpened stone struck beside a quiet river long ago flows the whole long story of human making. The hand axe was a tool so good it stayed in use for over 1,000,000 years. After the first simple flakes came a more beautiful invention, the hand axe, a teardrop of stone worked carefully on both faces to a point and an edge. It fit the palm comfortably and served as an all-purpose tool for cutting, chopping, digging, and butchering. What is most astonishing is how long it endured. The hand axe was made in much the same shape for well over 1,000,000 years across vast distances and many kinds of early humans, one of the longest lasting designs in all of history. Some were made with such care and symmetry that they may have been valued as objects of beauty, not only use. To hold one is to hold a thought shared across an almost endless line of makers, each learning the same patient craft, each shaping stone into something good and lasting. The first humans were skilled gatherers long before they were farmers. For the vast majority of our history, people lived by gathering what the land offered and hunting what they could. Far from a desperate struggle, this was often a life of deep knowledge, knowing which plants gave food and which gave medicine, where the roots grew sweet, when the berries ripened, how to read the movements of animals and the turning of the seasons. Women, men, and children all shared in the work of finding food, and a band that knew its land well could live with surprising ease, with time left over for rest, talk, and play. This way of life sustained our kind for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than farming has. It was a patient partnership with the living world, an intimate, unhurried knowledge of every plant and path, carried gently in the memory of each generation. The first humans gradually spread out of Africa to fill the world. Our kind began in Africa, and for a long time that was the whole of the human world. Then, slowly, over many thousands of years, small groups began to wander beyond it, following coastlines and river valleys, drawn onward by curiosity and the search for new lands, generation by generation, never as a single great journey, but as countless small steps. They spread across Asia, into Europe, and onward still. They crossed deserts and mountains, adapted to forests and frozen plains, and made homes in places utterly unlike where they began. It was one of the most remarkable migrations any creature has ever made. To picture it is to see not an army, but a series of quiet family camps, each a little farther on than the last. The human story slowly unfolding across the whole face of the earth, one horizon at a time. Ancient people crossed open sea to reach Australia tens of thousands of years ago. Among the most astonishing feats of the first humans was their arrival in Australia, which they reached at least 65,000 years ago. Even in those distant times, getting there required crossing significant stretches of open water, for Australia was never fully joined to the rest of the land. This means our ancestors must have had boats or rafts of some kind, and the knowledge to use them far earlier than was once believed. They set out across water they could not see the end of, trusting themselves to the sea, and they arrived and stayed and thrived. The descendants of those first travelers have lived there ever since, keeping one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. It is a quiet marvel that so long ago, people looked across the water toward an unseen shore and chose bravely to go. The first Americans arrived by following the land and the coast into a new world. For most of human history, the great continents of the Americas held no people at all. Then, during the ice ages, when so much water was locked in ice that the seas fell low, a bridge of land emerged between Asia and Alaska, and bands of hunters followed the animals across into a vast, empty world. Others may have traveled down the Pacific coast by boat, moving from shore to shore. However they came, they spread with remarkable speed, from the frozen north all the way to the southern tip of the Americas, over many generations. They were the first humans ever to see those mountains, rivers, and plains. Their descendants built rich and varied cultures across two whole continents. To imagine that first band cresting a hill and seeing an untouched land stretch out before them is to glimpse pure beginning. Several different kinds of humans once shared the earth at the same time. It is strange and wonderful to think that for most of our deep history, ours was not the only kind of human. At times, several different human species lived in the world together. Our own ancestors, the Neanderthals in Europe and the Near East, the Denisovans in Asia, and others besides, some quite small or unusual. They overlapped in time, and in places they met. Only relatively recently did we become the single kind of human left, the last branch of a once bushy family tree. For ages, a traveler crossing the ancient world might have encountered people not quite like themselves, cousins of a sort, shaped by different lands. It is a humbling and gentle truth that being human was once a wider, more various thing, and that we are the quiet survivors of a large and ancient family. The Neanderthals were not brutish, but capable and caring people. For a long time, the Neanderthals were imagined as dull and savage, but we now know far better. They were strong, intelligent humans, well adapted to the cold lands of Ice Age Europe. They made fine tools, controlled fire, hunted large animals with skill, and wore clothing against the cold. They cared for their sick and injured, for we have found their bones healed after serious harm, meaning others must have tended them through long recoveries. They may have buried their dead with thought and feeling. Some evidence even hints they made ornaments and markings. They were, in short, deeply human. Far from a failed experiment, they lived successfully for hundreds of thousands of years. To picture a Neanderthal family sheltering together from the winter, tending their fire in one another, is to see kindness that is older than our own species itself. A small piece of the Neanderthals lives on inside many of us today. When our ancestors spread out of Africa and met the Neanderthals, the two kinds of humans did not merely pass each other by. In places, they had families together, and because of that, a small trace of Neanderthal heritage survives in the bodies of many people living now, woven quietly into our very cells. The Neanderthals did not entirely vanish then. A little of them continues, carried forward in their distant descendants, which in a sense includes a great many of us. It is a tender and surprising connection across the ages that an ancient people who lived and loved in Ice Age Europe are, in a small and literal way, still here. When we speak of the first humans as our family, it is not only a figure of speech. Some of them are very gently family indeed. Ice ages shaped the world the first humans lived in. For much of the time of the early humans, the Earth was a colder place, passing through long ice ages when great sheets of ice spread down from the north and the seas drew back. Vast grassy plains stretched across lands now under forest or water, roamed by herds of remarkable animals. The cold demanded much of our ancestors: warm clothing, good shelter, and reliable fire. But it also created the wide open landscapes where they hunted and the low seas that let them walk to new lands. Between the cold ages came warmer spells, and the world breathed slowly in and out across the millennia. Our kind was forged in this changing world, learning to endure and adapt. To imagine those ice age plains at dusk, vast and pale and silent under a cold, bright sky, is to see the great stage on which the first human story was played. The first humans hunted enormous animals, now long vanished from the earth. The world of the ice ages was filled with great beasts: woolly mammoths and rhinoceroses clothed in shaggy hair, giant deer with sweeping antlers, cave bears, and more. The first humans lived among these animals, and sometimes hunted them, working together in groups to take prey far larger than any one person could face. From the mammoth, they gained not only meat, but bones for building, tusks for carving, and hides and fur for warmth. These hunts were acts of courage, skill, and deep cooperation, planned and remembered and passed on. Many of these great animals later disappeared as the ice ages ended and the world warmed. But for a time, our ancestors shared the land with creatures out of a dream. To picture a band of early hunters moving quietly across the snow toward a distant herd of mammoths is to glimpse a lost and wondrous world. People built shelters from mammoth bones where no wood could be found. On the cold, treeless plains of the Ice Age, where trees were scarce, some of the first humans built their homes from the bones of mammoths. They arranged great curved tusks and heavy bones into round frameworks, covering them with hides to make sturdy domed shelters against the wind and cold. Some of these dwellings used the bones of many mammoths and must have taken real planning and effort to raise. Inside, hearths kept them warm, and families lived through the long winters, sheltered by the remains of the very animals they depended on. The remains of these remarkable homes have been found, still arranged as they were left so long ago. It is a striking image of human ingenuity, that where the land gave no wood, people simply built with what they had, raising warm, round houses of ivory and bone beneath the wide, cold sky. The first humans wore clothing they made themselves to survive the cold. As our ancestors moved into colder lands, they learned to clothe themselves in the skins and furs of animals, scraping the hides clean and working them soft. In time, they invented the needle, slender tools of bone with a tiny eye, which let them sew fitted garments far warmer than a simple draped skin. With needle and thread of sinew, they could make snug clothing, sealed seams, and perhaps even decorated dress. This humble invention was as important as any weapon, for it let people live through winters that would otherwise have been deadly. Tiny ancient needles have been found, delicately made and clearly much used. To picture someone sitting by the fire on a winter evening, carefully stitching a warm garment for a child, is to see a scene of pure tenderness, repeated countless times, at the very root of the long human story. Long ago, people decorated themselves with beads and ornaments. The wish to adorn ourselves is very ancient. Among the remains of the first humans, we find beads made from shells, animal teeth, and bone, carefully pierced so they could be strung and worn. Some of these ornaments are tens of thousands of years old, and a few may be older still. People wore them as necklaces and decorations, perhaps to show who they were, where they belonged, or simply because they were beautiful. Certain shells were carried far inland from distant seas, suggesting they were treasured and traded. These small objects speak of something deeply human, a sense of beauty, of identity, of caring how one appears to others. To imagine an early person threading bright shells onto a cord by firelight, making something lovely to wear, is to recognize, across all the ages, a feeling we still know perfectly well today. The first humans painted beautiful pictures deep inside caves. Far back in the darkness of certain caves, our ancestors created some of the earliest and most breathtaking art in the world. By the light of small lamps, they painted herds of horses, bison, deer, lions, and mammoths across the rock, with a skill and grace that still astonish us. The animals seemed to move in the flickering light, full of life and energy, captured by artists working in deep, cold, silent places far from daylight. These paintings are many thousands of years old, yet their power has not faded. We do not fully know why they were made, perhaps for ritual, for teaching, for storytelling, or for the sheer joy of creation. But they prove beyond doubt that the first humans saw beauty and longed to capture it. To picture an artist alone in the deep dark, painting a great bull by lamplight, is to witness the birth of art itself. Ancient people left handprints on cave walls, like signatures across time. Among the most moving of all ancient art are the handprints. In caves around the world, the first humans pressed a hand to the rock and blew pigment round it, leaving a pale outline of their own palm and fingers behind. Sometimes they used red or black. Sometimes they stenciled dozens of hands together, large and small, grown and child. And to stand before them is to see the actual shape of a hand that lived tens of thousands of years ago, reaching out of the stone toward us. They are perhaps the simplest and most human mark anyone can make. I am here. I was real. This is my hand. No words survive from those people, but this gesture does, needing no translation at all. Across an almost unthinkable gulf of time, an ancient person quietly placed their hand on the wall, and it is still there, still reaching gently toward our own. The first humans carved small figures of people and animals. Beyond their paintings, our ancestors carved figures from stone, bone, ivory, and antler, some of the oldest sculpture in the world. They shaped lions, horses, and birds with great care and made small figures of the human form, often of women, round and gentle, worn smooth from handling. One tiny ivory figure of a lion-headed person is tens of thousands of years old and would have taken many hours to carve. These little works were carried, treasured, and perhaps held sacred. They show that the first humans did not only depict the world, but imagined and shaped it, making objects of meaning to keep close. To picture one of these small figures resting warm in an ancient palm, turned thoughtfully in the firelight, is to feel the deep human urge to create, to hold beauty in the hand, alive and unchanged from the very beginning. The first humans made music, and their flutes still survive. Deep among the remains of the Ice Age, archaeologists have found flutes carefully made from bird bone and mammoth ivory, with finger holes drilled along their length. These are real musical instruments, tens of thousands of years old, and when copies are made and played, they produce clear, sweet notes. This means our ancestors made music far back in the dawn of our kind, gathering perhaps in the firelit dark to play and sing together. Music may be almost as old as humanity itself, a comfort and a joy from the very beginning. We cannot know their melodies, lost forever to time, but we can hold their instruments and imagine the sound drifting through an ancient cave. To picture the first people making music together on a winter night, notes rising soft above the fire, is to know that the wish to sing has always been part of being human. The first humans buried their dead with care and tenderness. Among the surest signs of a deeply human heart is the care given to the dead, and our ancestors gave it long ago. They buried their loved ones gently, sometimes laid as if sleeping, sometimes sprinkled with red ochre, sometimes placed with tools, ornaments, or flowers. These were not careless acts, but deliberate, meaningful ones, signs of grief, love, and perhaps a belief in something beyond. At one famous site, the dead were laid to rest in ways that suggest real ceremony. To bury someone with care is to say that they mattered, that their life had worth, that their absence would be felt. This tenderness toward the dead is one of the oldest and most beautiful things about us. To imagine an ancient family standing quietly together over a grave, sorrowful and gentle, is to recognize a love that has not changed across all the long ages of our kind. Flowers may have been laid in a grave tens of thousands of years ago. At a cave called Shanidar, in the mountains of the Near East, a Neanderthal man was buried long ago, and around his remains, researchers found unusual clusters of ancient pollen. Some believed this meant that flowers had been gathered and laid upon his grave, a gesture of grief and beauty, almost beyond imagining for so distant a time. Though scholars still debate just how the pollen arrived, the image has touched the hearts of many, that an Ice Age people might have honored their dead with flowers, as we still do. The same cave held others who had been cared for, despite serious injuries, kept alive by the kindness of their companions. Whether or not flowers truly lay there, the deeper truth is clear. These were people who loved and grieved. To picture that quiet mountain burial is to feel tenderness reaching back beyond all measure. The first humans cared for their sick and elderly. The bones of ancient people tell quiet stories of compassion. Again and again, we find skeletons that had survived serious illness or injury, broken bones long healed, conditions that would have left a person unable to fend for themselves. For such people to live on, others must have fed them, sheltered them, and tended them through long months of helplessness. One ancient man had survived for years, though blind in one eye and crippled in an arm. This care was not rare but recurring, woven through our deep past. It tells us that the first humans valued one another beyond mere usefulness, that they kept their weak and their old among them with kindness. In a hard world, they chose gentleness. To imagine a band carrying an injured companion onward, sharing their food, sitting with the sick through the night, is to see that compassion is among the very oldest of all human gifts. Dogs were the first animals to become our companions. Long before any other creature, the wolf began to draw near to human camps, perhaps lured by scraps and warmth, perhaps welcomed by curious people. Over many generations, a friendship formed, and from those early wolves came the dog, the first animal ever to share human life. Dogs helped with hunting, gave warning of danger, and offered warmth and company through cold nights. In return, they received food, shelter, and affection. Ancient graves have been found where a person and a dog were buried together, sometimes with a gentle hand laid upon the animal, showing real love between them. This was the beginning of a bond that has lasted ever since. To picture one of the first dogs curled beside an ancient hearth, close against its sleeping human family, is to see the start of a friendship tens of thousands of years old and as warm and familiar tonight as it was then. The first humans learned to throw spears with surprising power and skill. Hunting great animals took more than courage. It took clever tools. Our ancestors invented the spear thrower, a simple carved length of wood or bone that acted like an extension of the arm, letting a hunter launch a light spear with far greater force and distance than by hand alone. Later came the bow and arrow, one of the most important inventions in all of history, which let people hunt from a distance with speed and precision. These weapons made hunting safer and more successful, and they show the deep human gift for solving problems through patient invention. Some spear throwers were even carved with beautiful animal shapes, tools that were also art. To imagine an ancient hunter standing still as stone at the edge of a clearing, drawing back a bow with quiet focus, is to see skill and patience honed across countless generations of our kind. Stone could be carried across great distances, hinting at early trade. Certain stones make far better tools than others, and the finest, like volcanic obsidian, sharp as glass, were prized. Archaeologists have found such stones, and beautiful seashells too, far from where they naturally occur, sometimes hundreds of miles inland. This means the first humans were moving valued materials across great distances, whether by traveling far themselves or by passing goods from hand to hand between distant groups, an early kind of trade. It suggests connections between bands, networks of exchange and contact stretching across the ancient land. People knew of others beyond their own horizon and shared the good things of the earth between them. To picture a treasured piece of glassy black stone passing from one group to another across the generations, traveling slowly across the whole of an ancient country, is to see that even in the deep past, the human world was quietly connected, woven together by what we shared. The first humans used red ochre for art, ritual, and decoration. One of the most ancient and widely used of all materials is ochre, a soft, earthy pigment ranging from yellow to deep red. The first humans gathered it, ground it, and used it constantly to paint on cave walls, to decorate their bodies and their dead, perhaps to treat hides or as part of ritual. Lumps of ochre marked with deliberate patterns are among the oldest signs of symbolic thought we have, older even than the great cave paintings. The color red seems to have held deep meaning, linked perhaps to life and blood, across the whole span of the human past, in every part of the world. People reached for this rich red earth to imagine an ancient hand grinding ochre into powder, mixing it with care, and drawing the first marks upon stone or skin is to see the deep beginnings of meaning, color, and art all at once. A long, slow childhood is one of the most human things about us. Among all creatures, humans take by far the longest to grow up. And this was already true of the first humans. A human child stays dependent for many years, learning slowly, playing, watching, and absorbing the vast knowledge a person needs. This long childhood is the price of our large brains and our complex way of life. But it is also a gift, years in which to learn language, skills, stories, and how to live among others. It bound families and bands closely together, for raising a child took many caring hands. The first human children, like all children, learned by watching their elders, copying the making of tools, the gathering of food, the telling of tales. To picture an ancient child sitting close beside a parent, small fingers trying to copy the shaping of a stone, is to see learning itself, the gentle passing on that built our whole world. Grandmothers may have helped make us human. In most animals, females do not live long past their childbearing years, but human women often live for decades more, and this is unusual and important. Some scientists believe that grandmothers played a vital role among the first humans. Freed from bearing their own young, older women could help gather food, care for grandchildren, and pass on a lifetime of hard-won knowledge: where to find food in a lean year, how to treat an illness, the old stories and ways. This help may have let mothers raise more children safely and let precious knowledge survive across the generations. The wisdom of the old became a treasure for the whole band. It is a warm and lovely idea that the patient care and deep memory of grandmothers sitting among the children, sharing food and stories, was woven into the very making of humankind, as it still blesses families today. The first humans were storytellers around the fire. We cannot dig up a story the way we dig up a stone tool, but everything we know suggests the first humans told them. Around the fire at night, when the day's work was done, people surely shared tales of the day's hunt, of ancestors, of animals and spirits, of where they came from and how the world was made. Stories taught the young, preserved knowledge, bound the band together, and made the long, dark hours warm. The great cave paintings and carvings hint at rich tales now lost to us. Language, that most human of gifts, made it all possible. To imagine an ancient evening, the fire low, faces gathered close, a quiet voice rising and falling as it tells of long ago, is to see one of the oldest and most comforting of all human scenes. The very scene, in its way, that we are sharing right now. Language is perhaps the greatest invention the first humans ever made. Of all the gifts that set humans apart, none is greater than language. The power to share thoughts, plans, memories, and feelings through spoken words. We cannot hear the voices of the first humans, and we do not know exactly when full language arose, but it was surely deep in our past, for so much of human life depends upon it. Language let people teach, cooperate, tell stories, and pass knowledge across generations, building a shared understanding that grew richer with time. It is the invisible thread that binds every human community together. Everything we have made, every tool and tale and tradition rests upon it. To imagine the first clear words passing between ancient people, naming the world around them and the feelings within them, is to witness the quiet birth of the most powerful and human thing of all, a gift we use without a thought in every gentle word tonight. The first humans watched the moon and stars and began to mark time. The night sky was far brighter and clearer to the first humans than it is to most of us now, a great glittering dome above their fires. They watched it closely, the moon swelling and shrinking through its phases, the stars wheeling slowly through the seasons, certain bright stars rising at certain times of year. Some ancient bones and stones bear rows of careful marks that may be tallies of the days or the moons among the first attempts to measure time. By the sky, people could predict the seasons, the coming of cold, or the return of the herds. The heavens became a calendar and a companion. To imagine an ancient person lying back beside the dying fire, gazing up at the same moon and stars we see tonight, beginning gently to find pattern and meaning in them, is to glimpse the first stirrings of science, born under the quiet ancient sky. A tiny kind of human once lived on a faraway island. On the Indonesian island of Flores, scientists made a startling discovery: the remains of a kind of human who stood barely a meter tall, with a small brain, yet who made tools and used fire. Nicknamed the Hobbit, these little people lived on their island for a very long time, hunting and surviving in isolation, perhaps shrinking in size over generations as island creatures sometimes do. They lived alongside miniature elephants and giant birds in a world like something from a dream. They were a true and separate kind of human, part of our wider family, who endured in their island home until surprisingly recent times. Their discovery reminded us how varied and surprising the human story has been. To imagine these small people moving quietly through their forest, tending their fires beneath strange stars, is to marvel at how many ways there have been, across time, of being human. We know a whole people mostly from a single fingertip of bone. In a cave in the mountains of Siberia, researchers found a tiny fragment of an ancient finger bone, and from it, astonishingly, they read enough to reveal an entirely unknown kind of human, now called the Denisovans. We have very few of their remains, yet by studying the faint traces of their heritage carried in people living today, we have learned that they once ranged widely across Asia and met our own ancestors. A people almost entirely lost to time was brought partly back into the light from a scrap of bone smaller than a coin. It is a quiet wonder of patient science and a reminder of how much of the human past still lies hidden, waiting. To think that an entire vanished people can leave so faint a trace, yet still whisper their existence to us across the ages, is humbling and strangely moving. The first humans learned to fish the rivers, lakes, and seas. Alongside hunting and gathering, the first humans turned to the water for food. They caught fish with spears, hooks of bone, woven traps and nets, and gathered shellfish along the shores in such quantities that great mounds of discarded shells still mark their ancient camps. Coastlines and riverbanks were rich and reliable places to live, and some of the earliest evidence of people thinking far ahead and traveling far comes from those who followed the sea. Fishing required its own deep knowledge. The habits of fish, the rhythm of the tides, the making of hooks and lines. It added a steady source of food to the human table. To imagine an ancient person standing patiently in the shallows at dawn, or sitting by a quiet river mending a net of plant fiber, is to see another of the gentle, patient skills by which the first humans made their living from the world. For most of human history, people lived in small, close-knit bands. The first humans did not live in cities or even villages, but in small groups, perhaps a few families together, who moved through the land with the seasons. Within such a band, everyone knew everyone, work and food were shared, and decisions were made together. There were no kings or rulers, no great divisions of rich and poor. People lived in a rough and intimate equality, bound by kinship and friendship. These small bands would meet others at times to trade, to share news, to find husbands and wives, keeping a wider web of connection. It was a deeply social way of life, warm and supportive, if also demanding. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was simply how humans lived. To picture such a band gathered at evening, sharing the day's food around a single fire, is to see the original shape of human society, small, close, and kind. The first villages appeared when people began to settle in one place. For most of our history, people moved with the seasons, but eventually, in a few rich places, some began to stay. Where food was plentiful enough, from wild grain, fish, or game, people could build lasting homes and live in one spot year-round, forming the first villages. This was a slow and gentle revolution. Settled life allowed people to gather more possessions, store food, and live in larger groups. But it also tied them to a single place and its fortunes. These early settlements, with their clustered houses and shared spaces, were the distant ancestors of every town and city that followed. To imagine one of the first villages at dusk, a handful of huts with smoke rising, people returning from the day's work, children playing in the lanes, is to see the quiet beginning of the settled world in which almost all of us now live. People built a great temple of stone before they built towns. At a hilltop in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe stand the remains of enormous carved stone pillars, arranged in circles, raised by people astonishingly long ago, before farming, before pottery, before the first cities. These hunter-gatherers somehow gathered, shaped, and raised great stones, weighing many tons, carving them with images of animals, foxes, boars, cranes, and snakes. It seems to have been a sacred gathering place, a temple raised by people who still live by hunting and gathering. This overturned an old idea, for it suggests that the wish to gather and worship may have helped lead people to settle and build, rather than the other way around. It is among the oldest monumental structures ever found. To imagine bands of ancient people traveling to that hill, working together to raise those great carved pillars beneath the open sky, is to see faith and cooperation older than civilization itself. The taming of wild plants slowly changed the human world forever. In a handful of places around the world, people began to do something new, to gather the seeds of favored wild plants and sow them, tending and harvesting them year after year. Over many generations, the plants themselves changed under human care, growing larger and more nourishing, until they became the first crops, the ancestors of wheat, barley, rice, maize, and more. This was the beginning of farming, one of the greatest turning points in all of human history. It allowed people to settle, to store food, and eventually to grow in number far beyond what gathering alone could feed. The change came so slowly that no one living through it could have seen it whole. To imagine an ancient gatherer noticing that seeds dropped near the camp grew into food and choosing thoughtfully to plant more is to see the small, quiet beginning of the entire farmed world. People learned to grind wild grain into flour long before farming. Even before they planted crops, the first humans gathered the seeds of wild grasses and ground them between stones into a coarse flour, which could be mixed with water and cooked into simple breads or porridges. Grinding stones, worn smooth by long use, have been found at very ancient sites, showing that people were processing plant foods with care far back in time. This patient work, kneeling to grind grain hour after hour, unlocked nourishment that could not be eaten raw, and it prepared the way for the farming that came later. It was humble, repetitive labor, often done by women, that fed whole families. To imagine an ancient person kneeling in the morning light, rolling a smooth stone back and forth over a hollow rock, slowly turning hard seeds into soft flour, is to see one of the quiet, essential tasks that lay at the very foundation of human survival. The making of pottery let people store and cook in new ways. At some point, the first humans discovered that soft clay, shaped by hand and hardened in fire, became hard, waterproof pottery, one of the most useful inventions of all. Clay pots could store grain and water, hold food safe from pests, and be set over a fire to cook soups and stews in ways never before possible. The earliest pots are very ancient, and over time, they were made in countless shapes and decorated with patterns, becoming both useful and beautiful. Broken pottery is among the most common things archaeologists find, a quiet record of daily life across the ages. To imagine an early potter pressing and smoothing wet clay into a bowl, setting it carefully in the fire, and lifting out a hard new vessel to carry home is to see human cleverness turning soft earth into one of the steady, lasting comforts of settled life. The oldest known drawing is a simple pattern, scratched with care. Long before the great cave paintings, someone took a piece of ochre and scratched a small cross-hatched pattern onto it. A set of crossing lines made on purpose, found in a cave in southern Africa and tens of thousands of years old. It is among the oldest known drawings made by a human hand, a deliberate design with no use but meaning. It is not a picture of anything, just a pattern, yet it marks a profound moment. The first known time a person made a mark simply to make it, to express, or to symbolize. From such humble beginnings grew all the art and writing of the world. To imagine that ancient person sitting quietly, drawing careful crossing lines onto a small red stone, is to witness one of the very first sparks of the symbolic mind, the deep human urge to make a mark that means something, flickering into life. Over the ages, the human brain grew slowly larger and more capable. One of the great changes across our deep history was the steady growth of the brain. Our earliest ancestors had brains not much larger than an ape's, but over a vast span of time, generation after generation, the human brain roughly tripled in size. With it came all the things that make us human: language, planning, imagination, art, and deep cooperation. This growth was gradual and uneven, shaped perhaps by the demands of making tools, finding food, and living in complex groups, and fed in part by the rich nourishment of cooked food. A larger brain was costly, hungry for energy, and slow to grow, but it gave our ancestors an unmatched power to understand and reshape their world. To picture the long, slow blossoming of the human mind across the ages, thought building gently upon thought through countless lives, is to see the quiet making of the most remarkable organ on earth, a nearly complete skeleton of an ancient boy was found by a lake. Near Lake Turkana in Kenya, researchers uncovered the remarkably complete skeleton of a boy who died long ago, some 1.5 million years in the past. Known as the Turkana boy, he was tall and slender, built for walking and running across the hot, open land. Already much like us in body, though belonging to an earlier kind of human. From his bones, we have learned a great deal about how our ancestors grew, moved, and lived. He was only a child when he died beside the ancient lake, yet across all those ages, his remains have taught us much about our shared past. There is something quietly poignant in it. A boy from the deep dawn of humankind, lost so long ago, who speaks to us still. To imagine him walking by that bright lake under the African sun is to glimpse our family in its early morning. The oldest known wooden tools are beautifully made hunting spears. Wood rarely survives for long, so most ancient tools we find are of stone. But in a few rare places, ancient wood has been preserved. At one site in Germany, archaeologists found wooden throwing spears, around 300,000 years old, carefully shaped and balanced like a modern javelin, made to be thrown. They are among the oldest known hunting weapons in the world, and their fine craftsmanship surprised everyone. Proof that the people who made them were skilled and thoughtful hunters. That such fragile things survive so long is a small miracle. They remind us that the first humans worked not only in stone, but in wood, bone, and fiber, most of which has vanished without trace. To imagine an ancient hunter weighing one of these smooth spears in the hand, testing its balance with a practiced eye, is to see craft and care reaching back across hundreds of thousands of years. Ancient footprints in Britain are among the oldest signs of humans in Europe. On a beach in eastern England, at a place called Happisburgh, the sea briefly uncovered a set of human footprints pressed into ancient mud, then quickly washed them away again, but not before they were recorded. They were astonishingly old, around 900,000 years, the oldest known human footprints outside of Africa. A small group, including children, had walked across an estuary mudflat in a Britain far colder and stranger than today. Across that vast gulf of time, we can see the very marks of their feet, the size of their steps, the moment of their passing. Such footprints are among the most intimate things the deep past has left us, far more personal than any tool. To imagine that little band walking along the ancient shore so unthinkably long ago, leaving their soft prints in the mud, is to stand for a moment in their own footsteps. The varied colors of human skin are gifts of the sun and our long journey. As the first humans spread across the world into lands of fierce sun and lands of long gray winters, their bodies slowly adapted, and one of the changes was in the color of their skin. Under strong sun, darker skin protected against harm. In cloudy northern lands, lighter skin helped the body make use of weaker light. These changes came gradually over many generations as people settled into different climates. The beautiful range of human skin tones we see today is simply the record of that long journey, each shade a quiet adaptation to a particular corner of the earth our ancestors came to call home. Beneath it all, we remain one closely related family, more alike than different. To understand this is to see human variety as something gentle and natural, the visible memory of our ancestors' great spreading across the whole bright and shadowed world. Blue eyes likely began with a single person long ago. Most of our ancestors had brown eyes, and for most of human history, everyone did. Then, Some thousands of years ago, a small change arose in one person, dimming the brown and leaving the eyes blue. And from that single ancient individual, it seems, all blue-eyed people today are descended. It is a striking thought that a trait now shared by many millions traces back to one person in the deep past, whose eyes were the first of their kind. Such small changes ripple quietly down the generations, spreading through families across the ages. It is a reminder of how connected we all are, how the threads of our heritage tie us to particular ancestors we will never know. To imagine that one ancient person looking out at their world through the first pair of blue eyes, never guessing the long legacy they carried, is to feel the deep and intimate web of human kinship. Some humans adapted to drink milk into adulthood, and many did not. For nearly all of human history and for most mammals, the ability to digest milk faded after childhood. But after some people began keeping animals like cattle, goats, and sheep, a change arose in certain groups that let them keep digesting milk throughout their lives. A useful gift where herds gave a steady supply. This trait spread through those populations over the generations, while in many other parts of the world, it never became common, and most adults there do not drink fresh milk easily. It is a small, recent twist in the human story, written into our very bodies by the way our ancestors lived. It shows how closely our biology and our ways of life are woven together. To consider it is to see that even something as ordinary as a cup of milk carries within it a quiet tale of ancient herders and the slow adapting of our kind. The first humans counted and left their tallies carved in bone. Among the oldest mathematical objects in the world are ancient bones marked with rows of careful notches. One, found in Africa and many thousands of years old, bears neat groups of cut lines that may record a count of days, or of objects, or perhaps the phases of the moon. Whatever exactly it tallied, it shows that the first humans were counting and keeping records far back in time, one of the earliest steps toward all mathematics. To mark a quantity, to keep a count outside the head, is a profound and useful idea. These simple notched bones are the distant ancestors of every number and calculation that followed. To imagine an ancient person carefully cutting line after line into a bone, keeping track of something that mattered to them, the days until the herd's return, perhaps, is to see the patient, practical beginning of the counting mind, scratched gently into bone by firelight. Changing climates gently pushed the first humans across the world. The movements of the first humans were not random wandering, but were shaped in part by the slow breathing of the Earth's climate. As the world warmed and cooled across the ages, deserts bloomed and dried, seas rose and fell, forests advanced and retreated, and grasslands opened and closed like great doors across the land. In wetter times, green corridors stretched across what is now desert, letting people pass through. In colder times, low seas joined lands, now divided by water. Our ancestors followed these shifting paths, the herds, the rivers, the open ways, spreading into new lands as the world opened them. The very shape of the human journey was drawn by climate's patient hand. To picture an ancient land slowly greening after long drought, and small bands of people moving quietly along its new rivers, into country no human had seen, is to watch the earth itself gently guiding the spread of our kind. The Sahara was once a green land of lakes, rivers, and people. The vast desert of the Sahara, so dry and empty now, was not always so. In wetter ages of the past, it was a green and living land, dotted with lakes and rivers, grasslands and herds, and people lived there in numbers. We know this from the rock art they left behind: paintings and carvings of cattle, giraffes, hippos, and people swimming, scattered now across what is today bare desert. These images show a world of water and abundance, where now there's only sand. As the climate slowly changed and the rains failed, the green Sahara dried, and its people moved away, some perhaps toward the Nile. It is a haunting reminder of how greatly the earth can change. To imagine herders driving their cattle across a green Sahara beside a wide blue lake, beneath skies now empty over endless dunes, is to glimpse a vanished, gentle world. All people alive today share a common ancestral mother in the deep past. By studying a kind of heritage passed down only from mother to child, scientists have traced a line back through the generations to a single woman who lived in Africa long ago, an ancestor of every human being now alive. She has been gently nicknamed our common mother, though she was not the only woman of her time, simply the one whose particular line of daughters has continued unbroken to us all. She lived an ordinary life in the ancient world, never knowing that every person on earth would one day trace a thread back to her. In the same way, there is a common ancestral father far back along another line. It is a beautiful and unifying truth that beneath all our differences, every human alive shares ancestors, that we are all, quite literally, one far-flung family, joined in the deep past by ties we carry still. Out of one homeland, our kind spread to become a single human family. The deeper science looks, the clearer it becomes that all people living today descend from ancestors who lived in Africa, and that our species is remarkably closely related, more alike in our heritage than many other animals are within a single region. The differences we see between peoples are recent and shallow, painted on by climate and chance across the surface of a deep and shared inheritance. Every human now alive is a cousin to every other, near or far. The first humans, spreading slowly across the world, did not split into separate kinds. They remained one people, scattered but united by blood. It is perhaps the most important thing the story of the first humans has to teach. To hold it in the mind as sleep draws near, that all the world's peoples are one family, descended from the same ancient mothers and fathers, is a deeply peaceful thought. The first boats may have been simple rafts and hollowed logs. We know the first humans crossed water to reach distant lands, which means they had some way to travel upon it, though the boats themselves have almost all rotted away. The earliest were likely simple craft, rafts of bound reeds or logs, or canoes hollowed from a single great tree trunk by patient burning and scraping. The oldest surviving boat we have found, a dugout canoe, is thousands of years old, preserved in a bog. With such humble vessels, people fished, crossed rivers and lakes, and ventured along coasts and even out of sight of land. The boat opened the water as a road. To imagine an ancient person guiding a hollowed log across a still lake at dawn, or a family poling a reed raft along a quiet shore, is to see the gentle beginning of all seafaring, the first small craft setting out upon the wide and patient water. The first humans wove baskets and made cord from plants. Long before metal or pottery, people learned to work with plant fibers, twisting them into cord and string, and weaving them into baskets, nets, and mats. These soft crafts rarely survive, but their faint traces, impressions in clay, fragments preserved in dry caves, tell us they are very ancient. Cord and string were quietly essential for tying tools to handles, making nets and traps, stringing beads, and binding shelters together. Baskets let people gather and carry food in quantity. This humble technology of fiber, often the work of skilled and patient hands, underpinned much of daily life, though it has mostly vanished without a trace. To imagine an ancient person sitting in the sun, fingers deftly twisting plant fibers into strong cord, or weaving supple stems into a sturdy basket, is to see one of the quietest and most useful of all human crafts, old as our cleverness itself. The first humans tamed animals as well as plants. Just as they gathered and then sowed wild plants, the first humans also drew certain wild animals into their lives. After the dog came the others, wild sheep and goats in the hills of the Near East, then cattle and pigs, gentled over generations into the tame herds and flocks that would feed and clothe their keepers. A penned animal was a store of food on the hoof and gave milk, wool, hides, and labor besides. This taming of animals, alongside the taming of plants, transformed how people lived, tying them to their herds and their land. It came slowly in a few places and spread outward across the ages. To imagine an ancient herder watching over the first small flock of goats on a green hillside, learning their ways and guiding them home at evening, is to see the gentle beginning of the long partnership between humans and the animals we keep. The first weavers turned wool and flax into cloth. Once people kept sheep and grew certain plants like flax, they learned to spin their fibers into thread and weave the thread into cloth, a craft of great patience and skill. The simple loom, a frame on which threads are stretched and crossed, let them make warm woolen and cool linen fabrics, far more comfortable and versatile than animal hides alone. Spinning and weaving became central tasks of settled life, often the work of women, filling the home with the soft rhythm of the loom. Scraps of ancient cloth and the weights and tools used to make it show how old and important this craft was. To imagine an early weaver passing the thread back and forth across the loom, slowly building a length of cloth from nothing but fiber and patience, is to see one of the gentle domestic arts that clothed humankind and softened the texture of daily life. The first humans made fire whenever they needed it. Early on, people may have only kept fire they found, but in time they learned to make it themselves, a power of enormous worth. They discovered that striking certain stones together through sparks, or that spinning a wooden stick rapidly against a board, created enough heat to catch a glowing ember in dry tinder. With these methods, a skilled person could make fire almost anywhere, freeing the band from the constant care of keeping a flame alive. Fire making was a precious skill, surely taught with care from one generation to the next. It meant warmth, cooking, and safety could be summoned at will. To imagine an ancient person kneeling in the cold, patiently spinning a fire drill between their palms, coaxing a thread of smoke into a small glowing coal and then into flame, is to see one of the most useful and hard-won skills of early human life, the gentle conjuring of light from wood. The end of the Ice Age slowly reshaped the human world. After many long ages of cold, the Earth at last warmed. The great ice sheets melted and drew back toward the poles, and the world settled into the gentler climate we know today. The seas rose as the ice released its water, drowning low coastlines and the land bridges people had crossed, and separating lands once joined. Forests spread where tundra had been, and many of the great Ice Age animals, the mammoths and their kind, slowly vanished. For the first humans, this warming world brought both loss and opportunity. Old ways of life faded, but new ones, including settled farming, became possible in the kinder climate. The world was being remade around them. To imagine the great ice retreating at last after unthinkable ages rivers running with meltwater and green life spreading into the freed land, is to see the close of one vast chapter of the human story and the quiet opening of another. Farming arose on its own in several different parts of the world. One of the most remarkable things about the beginning of farming is that it did not happen only once. In several separate places around the world, quite independently and without contact, people made the same great discovery that wild plants could be sown and tended. In the Near East, they tamed wheat and barley. In Eastern Asia, rice and millet. In the Americas, maize, beans, and squash. In other places, still other crops. Each region grew its own farming from its own wild plants, in its own way, yet all reached the same threshold within a few thousand years of one another. It speaks to something deep and shared in the human mind, a common readiness to take that step, to consider that people across the whole world, unknown to each other, each gently began to farm their own land, is to see humankind quietly arriving together at a great turning point. The first farmers paid a price for their new way of life. Farming let people grow in number and build the settled world. But it was not at first an easy bargain. Studies of ancient bones suggest that early farmers often worked harder and ate a less varied diet than the gatherers before them, relying heavily on a few crops. They were sometimes shorter and showed more signs of hardship and disease, for crowding and a narrow diet brought their own troubles. Yet farming fed more people from the same land, and so it spread, and the settled world it built brought gifts of its own in time. It is a thoughtful reminder that progress is rarely simple, that great changes carry both loss and gain. To consider the first farmers, laboring long in their fields for a harder life than their gathering grandparents knew, is to see the human story in its true complexity, neither a simple rise nor a simple fall, but a winding path. Many of the great Ice Age animals vanished as the world changed. The mammoths, the giant ground sloths, the great cave bears, and others, the magnificent megafauna of the Ice Age, slowly disappeared as that cold world ended. Why exactly they vanished is still gently debated. The warming climate transformed their habitats, and the first humans, spreading and hunting, may have added to the pressure on already struggling herds. Most likely it was both together, a changing world and a new and clever predator. Whatever the cause, these wondrous creatures passed from the earth, leaving only their bones, the paintings made of them, and the carved ivory of their tusks. Their loss marked the end of an age. To imagine the very last of the mammoths, a small herd moving across a thawing northern land beneath a changing sky, the great cold world that made them slowly slipping away, is to feel a quiet sorrow for the wild and vanished companions of our ancestors. The first humans treasured the bones and tusks of mammoths. To the people of the Ice Age, the mammoth was a creature of enormous worth, and they used every part of it, beyond meat for food and hides and fur for warmth. The great curved tusks of ivory were carved into beads, figures, and tools, and the heavy bones were built into shelters or burned as fuel where wood was scarce. Some of the most beautiful ancient art, delicate figures of animals and people, was carved patiently from mammoth ivory. A single mammoth could supply a band with food, shelter, fuel, and material for art and tools all at once. The animal was woven deeply into their lives. To imagine an ancient carver working a piece of smooth ivory by the fire, slowly shaping it into the small figure of a horse or a bird, is to see how closely the lives of the first humans were bound to the great beasts they lived among. Some of the oldest paintings show not animals, but the human imagination at work. Among the ancient cave art, alongside the herds of real animals, are stranger images, figures that are part human and part beast, scenes that may show spirits, dreams, or stories from belief. One ancient painting in a faraway cave seems to show a hunting scene with creatures that are part animal and part person. These are not portraits of the everyday world, but glimpses into the inner world of the first humans, their myths, their spirits, their imagination. They suggest that our ancestors already told stories of more than what they could see, that they had beliefs about unseen things. It is a profound and moving thought. To imagine an ancient artist painting not a real animal, but a creature from a story or a dream, by the trembling light of a lamp deep underground, is to see the human imagination, that endless inner world, already richly alive at the dawn of our kind. The first humans buried their dead with treasures for a journey. At some ancient burials, the dead were laid to rest not alone, but with care and with gifts, tools, ornaments, food, weapons, and beautiful objects placed gently beside them. At one remarkable site, individuals were buried covered in thousands of carefully made ivory beads, representing an extraordinary amount of labor and love. Such burials suggest a belief that the dead might need these things, that death was perhaps not an end, but a passage to somewhere else. They also show that some individuals were honored above others, hinting at the first stirrings of difference in status. Above all, they speak of deep feeling. To imagine an ancient community laboring for many hours, to prepare a loved one for burial, adorning them with thousands of beads, and laying treasures at their side, is to see grief, love, and hope reaching across the boundary of death, far back in the human past. The first humans lived beneath far darker, brighter skies than ours. It is worth pausing on how different the night was for the first humans. With no cities, no electric light, no glow on the horizon, their nights were profoundly dark, and the sky above blazed with stars in a way few of us ever see. The whole glittering band of the galaxy arching clear from edge to edge. Into that darkness, their small fires shone like the only light in the world, gathering the band close. The night held real dangers and deep beauty, both. The moon was their brightest lamp, the stars their clock and calendar and companions. To imagine lying beside an ancient fire, the dark pressing close beyond its glow, and looking up at a sky thick with more stars than we can now imagine, is to share, across all the ages, in one of the oldest and most humbling of all human experiences, the vast and quiet ancient night. The first humans were exactly as intelligent as we are. It is easy to imagine ancient people as simpler or duller than ourselves, but this is quite wrong. The first humans of our own kind had minds fully as capable as any alive today. A baby born tens of thousands of years ago, if somehow raised in our world now, would grow up an ordinary modern person, learning to read, drive, and use a phone like anyone else. They lacked our accumulated knowledge and tools, built up slowly across the generations, but not our intelligence. They solved hard problems, made art, told stories, navigated by the stars, and survived in a difficult world by their wits. They were us, in every way that matters, simply living at the beginning of the long human adventure. To hold this in mind is to feel close to them, not primitive strangers, but people exactly as clever, curious, and feeling as ourselves, gazing at the same moon with the same wondering minds. A man who died in the mountains was preserved whole for thousands of years. High in the Alps, hikers once stumbled upon the body of a man who had died there long ago, frozen and preserved by the ice for over 5,000 years. Nicknamed the Iceman, he came to us astonishingly complete, with his clothes of fur and grass, his tools and copper axe, his last meal still in his stomach, and even tattoos upon his skin. From him, we have learned an extraordinary amount about ordinary life in his distant time, what people wore, ate, and carried, how they lived and died. He was simply a person going about his life when the mountains took him and the ice kept him safe across the millennia. To imagine this ancient traveler climbing through the high cold passes so long ago, dressed against the wind, his tools at his belt, is to meet one real individual from the deep past, preserved gently for us by the snow. Ancient footprints show a parent and child crossing a dangerous land. On the white gypsum flats of what is now New Mexico, a long trail of ancient human footprints was found, made by someone walking quickly across muddy ground long ago, carrying a small child, setting them down now and then to rest, then lifting them again. Around the prints run the tracks of great Ice Age animals, a giant ground sloth, a mammoth that crossed the same ground. Across thousands of years, we can read the whole quiet story in the mud. A young person, perhaps a mother, hurrying a little one across an open land where huge creatures roamed, holding the child close. It is among the most human and touching things the ancient earth has ever given us. To imagine that anxious, loving journey, a parent carrying a child to safety across a wild land beneath an ancient sky, is to feel a tenderness that bridges all the long ages between. An ancient girl left her name, in a way, in a piece of chewed tar. Long ago, a young person chewed a small lump of birch tar, used as a kind of glue and perhaps as an early chewing gum, and then spat it out, where it lay preserved for thousands of years. From the traces left in that humble lump, scientists were able to learn a remarkable amount about her. That she was a girl, the likely color of her hair, skin, and eyes, what she had recently eaten, even the tiny creatures living in her mouth. A whole small portrait of a real ancient child, conjured from a piece of chewed tar she dropped one ordinary day. She never imagined that her gum would one day let people meet her across the ages. To consider her an ordinary girl going about her day so long ago, suddenly brought a little into the light by the smallest of accidents, is to feel the deep past become, for a moment, intimately and humanly real. The first humans built great structures of standing stones. As people settled and gathered in larger numbers, they began, in many parts of the world, to raise great monuments of stone. They set up tall standing stones alone or in rings, built long mounded tombs, and aligned their works with the rising and setting sun at the turning points of the year. Raising such enormous stones took the planning and labor of many people working together, with only ropes, levers, sledges, and patience. These monuments were places of gathering, of burial, of ceremony, and of marking time by the heavens. They stand still today, weathered and silent in many lands. To imagine ancient communities coming together to raise a great stone upright against the sky, hauling it slowly into place with shared effort, then gathering there to watch the midwinter sun rise exactly as they intended, is to see cooperation, faith, and skill on a grand scale, deep in the human past. The first humans learned to work metal, beginning with shining copper. For almost all of human history, tools were made of stone, wood, and bone. But eventually, people discovered that certain bright stones, when heated in a hot fire, melted and could be poured and shaped. The first metals. Copper was among the earliest, hammered and then melted and cast into ornaments and tools. Gold, soft and gleaming, was treasured for its beauty. Much later, people learned to mix copper with other metals to make bronze, harder and more useful. This discovery of metalworking slowly transformed the world, though stone tools remained in use alongside metal ones for a long time. It was the beginning of a new age. To imagine an early metalworker watching, amazed, as a glowing trickle of molten copper ran from a stone in the heat of a fire, and pouring it carefully to cool into a shining new shape, is to see human curiosity unlocking yet another secret of the earth. Some of the earliest towns had houses entered through the roof. At an ancient settlement called Çatalhöyük in what is now Turkey, thousands of people once lived packed tightly together in mud brick houses, with no streets between them. The homes were built wall to wall, and people walked across the rooftops, entering their houses by ladders through openings in the roof. Inside, the walls were sometimes painted, and the dead were buried beneath the floors, kept close to the living. It was one of the largest gatherings of people the world had yet seen, a glimpse of the crowded, settled life that was to come. There were no palaces or temples set apart. The houses were much alike, hinting at a community still largely equal. To imagine this ancient town at evening, people climbing down through their roofs as the smoke of cooking fires drifts upward, children playing across the rooftop paths, is to see one of humanity's first experiments in living closely together. The first humans made roads of wood across the wetlands. In the marshy lands of ancient Britain and Europe, where the ground was too soft and wet to walk, people built trackways of wood, laying down planks and poles to make raised paths across the bogs. One such ancient timber track, preserved in the waterlogged ground, is thousands of years old and was carefully built from split planks pegged in place, a real feat of engineering. These wooden roads let people cross otherwise impassable land, linking settlements and dry islands across the marsh. That such fragile wooden structures have survived at all is thanks to the preserving wetness of the bogs. They are among the oldest roads in the world. To imagine ancient people laying down these wooden walkways with care, then crossing the misty marshes upon them, baskets on their backs, dry-footed above the water and reeds, is to see human ingenuity making a path where nature offered none. The first humans tamed the horse, and the world grew suddenly larger. Long after the dog, and after the herds of sheep and cattle, people on the wide grasslands tamed the wild horse, and this changed everything. A person on horseback could travel far faster and farther than on foot, herd animals with ease, and carry goods and messages across great distances. The horse shrank the vast plains and connected distant peoples as never before. In time, horses would pull carts and chariots and carry riders across the whole of the ancient world. It was one of the great partnerships between humans and animals, born among the herders of the open steppe. To imagine one of the first people ever to sit upon a horse's back, rising suddenly high above the grass, feeling the animal's power beneath them, and setting off across the plain faster than any human had ever traveled, is to glimpse a moment when the human world quietly, wonderfully widened. The wheel was one of humanity's simplest and greatest inventions. Surprisingly late in the human story, after farming, after towns, after metalworking, someone first set a round wheel turning on an axle, and the world was never the same. The wheel let people move heavy loads with ease, pull carts and wagons, and shape pottery on the spinning potter's wheel. So simple in idea, so powerful in use, it is hard to imagine the world without it now. Yet for the vast majority of human history, there were no wheels at all, and great things were built and moved without them. Its invention was a quiet stroke of genius that rolled slowly outward across the world. To imagine the first cart creaking into motion behind a patient ox, its wheels turning where before everything had been carried or dragged, is to see one of those small, profound moments when human cleverness made the whole of life a little easier and set the world gently rolling forward. The first humans gathered honey from wild bees long ago. One of the oldest sweet pleasures is honey, and the first humans sought it out eagerly. Ancient rock paintings show people climbing high on ropes or ladders to reach wild beehives in cliffs and trees, braving the stings to gather the precious comb. Honey was a rare burst of sweetness in a world without sugar, treasured for food and perhaps for medicine. Gathering it took courage and skill, and the joy of it was surely great. These paintings, made thousands of years ago, capture the timeless human love of something sweet. To imagine an ancient honey gatherer high on a swaying ladder against a cliff, smoke in hand to calm the bees, reaching carefully into the hive for the dripping golden comb, is to see a small, sweet scene from deep in the past, a moment of risk and reward that any lover of honey today would understand at once. The first humans made ornaments from ostrich eggshell, traded far and wide. In Africa, among the oldest of all ornaments, are beads made from pieces of ostrich eggshell, ground round and pierced, then strung into necklaces and bands. People made them tens of thousands of years ago, and the styles of these little beads spread across vast distances, suggesting that the groups who made them were connected, sharing fashions and perhaps exchanging the beads themselves as gifts and tokens. A particular style of bead might link communities hundreds of miles apart. They were a way of belonging, of marking identity and friendship across the ancient land. To imagine an early person patiently grinding fragments of eggshell round against a stone, drilling each tiny hole, and stringing them into something to give or to wear, is to see again the deep human love of beauty and connection, expressed in the smallest and most patient of crafts, deep in our shared past. The first humans carried fire-making and tool-making knowledge in living memory alone. For nearly all of the human story, there were no books, no writing, no schools as we know them. Everything a person needed to know: how to make fire and tools, find food and water, treat illness, read the weather and the stars, tell the stories of the people, was held entirely in living memory and passed from person to person by showing and telling. This made the elders, with their deep store of knowledge, immensely valuable, and made the close bonds of the band essential, for to lose a knowledgeable person was to lose a kind of library. Knowledge lived in people, not on pages. Not, it is a striking thought, how much was carried in each mind. To imagine an elder patiently teaching the young the old skills and stories, knowing this was the only way they could survive, is to see how precious memory and teaching were to the first humans. The first humans spread the dog to nearly every corner of the world. Wherever the first humans went, in time, the dog went with them. From its origins among ancient wolves, the dog accompanied people across continents and oceans into the Americas, out to remote islands, across frozen north and burning desert. It is found among nearly all the world's peoples, our oldest and most faithful animal companion, carried everywhere by the human family. Dogs pulled sleds across the snow, helped hunt in the forests, guarded camps, and warmed cold nights, earning their place 1,000 times over. The bond first formed in the deep past has never broken. To imagine the dogs of the first humans trotting alongside their people on the great migrations, sharing their fires and their journeys across the whole spreading world, is to see a friendship that traveled with us everywhere we went, as much a part of the human story as fire itself, and as warm. The first humans understood plants as medicine, not only food. The deep knowledge the first humans held of the plants around them went far beyond which ones to eat. They knew, too, which leaves could ease a pain, which barks could calm a fever, which roots could heal a wound. A vast inherited pharmacy carried in memory and gathered from the living land. Even our ancient cousins seem to have used such remedies. Traces of medicinal plants have been found in the dental remains of Neanderthals. This healing knowledge, built up over countless generations of careful observation, was among the most precious things a band possessed. The first humans were, in their way, the first doctors. To imagine an ancient healer gathering particular herbs with care, knowing exactly which would soothe a sick child or ease an elder's aching joints, and preparing them gently by the fire, is to see compassion and deep knowledge joined together, tending the human body far back in the dawn of our kind. The first humans loved color and learned to make it. Beyond the red of ochre, the first humans sought out and made a whole palette of colors. They ground minerals to make yellows, reds, browns, and the black of charcoal and manganese, and found ways to make white from chalk and shell. With these, they painted caves, decorated objects, and adorned their bodies and their dead. The making and use of color was bound up with meaning, beauty, and ritual. To find and prepare a good pigment took knowledge and effort, and certain colors may have been especially prized and carried far. The world of the first humans was not drab but bright with the colors they gathered and made. To imagine an ancient person grinding bright minerals into vivid powders, mixing them with fat or water, and using them to make something beautiful on a wall, an object, or a living face, is to see the deep and joyful human love of color alive from the very beginning. Writing was the invention that finally turned the first human story into history. For the whole vast span of the first humans, there was no writing, and so their tale must be read from bones, tools, and art alone. Then, only a few thousand years ago, in a few places, people invented writing. First as simple marks for counting goods, then as full systems that could capture spoken words. With writing, people could record laws, stories, accounts, and names. And for the first time, voices from the past could speak to us directly in their own words. This was the threshold between the deep prehistory of the first humans and recorded history. Everything before it we must piece together quietly. Everything after we can read. To imagine an early scribe pressing the first written signs into wet clay, capturing speech in lasting marks, is to see the closing of the long wordless dawn of humankind and the beginning of the written human story. The same kinds of stories arose among peoples all across the world. As people spread across the earth and developed their many cultures, a remarkable thing happened. Again and again, far-flung peoples who had never met told strikingly similar kinds of stories. Tales of a great flood, of the first humans made from earth or clay, of a hero who brings fire or light to the people, of the stars as ancestors or animals, appear among cultures separated by whole oceans. Some of these echoes may reach back to very ancient stories carried by the first humans as they spread, kept, and changed across the ages. Others arose separately from the shared depths of the human mind. Either way, they reveal something common in us all. To consider that peoples across the whole world, unknown to one another, told such kindred tales around their fires, is to feel the deep unity beneath all human cultures, one imagination, scattered across the earth. The first humans honored certain places as sacred. Long before temples and shrines, the first humans seem to have felt that certain places held a special power or meaning. A deep cave, a striking mountain, a spring, a great stone, a grove. They returned to such places across the generations, leaving art, offerings, or their dead, marking them as set apart from ordinary ground. The deep painted caves themselves were surely sacred spaces, entered with purpose and perhaps with awe. This sense of the sacred, of places where the everyday world touches something greater, is very old and very human. It gave meaning to the landscape and bound communities to particular spots across time. To imagine ancient people journeying to a place they held holy, a hidden cave or a high windswept stone, and there performing their quiet ceremonies beneath the open sky or deep in the earth, is to see the ancient roots of reverence, the human reaching toward the sacred, far back in the dawn of our kind. The first humans adapted to live in nearly every climate on Earth. Few creatures can live in so many different places as humans, and this was already true of the first humans. They made homes in burning deserts and frozen tundra, in deep forests and high mountains, on tropical coasts and windswept plains. They did this not by changing their bodies greatly, but by their cleverness, making the right clothes, shelters, tools, and ways of finding food for each new land. A people on the ice hunted seals and wore furs. A people in the desert knew every hidden water source. A people in the forest read the trees. This astonishing adaptability, born of intelligence and culture rather than fang or fur, let our kind fill the whole world. To imagine the great variety of the first human ways of life, each band perfectly fitted to its own corner of the earth, is to marvel at the flexible human mind that made a home of the entire planet. The first humans passed down their skills by patient watching and doing. There were no lessons or lectures among the first humans. The young learned by watching their elders closely and trying for themselves again and again until they mastered each skill. A child learned to knap stone by sitting beside a skilled maker, watching the angle of each strike, then practicing on their own with patient hands. They learned to track, to find food, to make fire, to tell the stories, all by doing alongside those who knew. This hands-on, watchful learning, repeated across the generations, kept the precious skills of survival alive and slowly improved them over time. It was teaching at its most natural and human. To imagine an ancient child sitting close beside a grandparent, eyes following every careful movement, then taking up the stone or the cord to try the task themselves, is to see the gentle, timeless way that knowledge has always passed from the old to the young, hand to patient hand. The first humans felt wonder and asked the great questions. We cannot read the thoughts of the first humans, but everything they left behind, their art, their burials, their sacred places, their care for one another, tells us they were not merely surviving but wondering. They surely looked at the stars, at death, at birth, at the great animals and the changing seasons, and asked themselves what it all meant, where they came from, what happens when we die, why the world is as it is. The same questions that move us move them. Their answers woven into stories and rituals now lost, were the first philosophies and faiths. To wonders among the deepest of human traits, and it is very old. To imagine an ancient person gazing up at the night sky in silence, struck by its vastness and beauty, turning over in their mind the same great mysteries we still ponder today, is to feel how truly and fully human the first people were. The whole story of the first humans rests on small, patient discoveries. Looking back, there was no single moment when humans suddenly became modern. Instead, our long rise was built of countless small steps, each a quiet discovery passed on and improved. A better way to strike a stone, to make a fire, to sew a garment, to tell a tale, to plant a seed. No one person invented the human world. It was made slowly together across thousands of generations, each adding a little to what they received. This patient, cumulative building is perhaps the deepest secret of our kind. The way we gather knowledge across time, standing always on the shoulders of those before. To consider that everything we have flows from this long chain of small gifts, each ancient person handing on a little more than they were given, is to feel deep gratitude toward the first humans, and to see our whole civilization as one vast, shared, patient work. Every human alive carries the inheritance of the first humans. We are not separate from the first humans, we are their direct continuation, carrying their gifts in everything we do. The language we speak, the fire we cook with, the tools we use, the stories we love, the very shape of our hands and minds, all reach back to them. When we gather with family, care for the sick, gaze at the stars, make something beautiful, or sit talking around a warm light at the end of the day, we are doing exactly what they did in an unbroken line stretching back across the ages. Their blood runs in us. Their inventions surround us. Their way of being human is our own. To feel this connection is to know that we are never truly alone, but held within a vast human family, reaching back to the very dawn. The first humans are not strangers in a distant past. They are us at the beginning. The first humans laughed and loved and played. It is easy, looking at ancient bones and stones, to forget that the first humans were not solemn figures, but living people full of feeling. They surely laughed together at the day's small absurdities, teased and joked, fell in love and grieved, comforted crying children, and delighted in playing ones. Children then, as now, must have played games, made toys, chased and tumbled and laughed. The warmth of human company, the joys of family and friendship, the simple happiness of a good meal shared by the fire. All of this was theirs as fully as it is ours. Their lives were hard in ways we can scarcely imagine, but they were rich in love and laughter too. To picture an ancient evening filled not with grim survival but with quiet contentment, soft laughter and play around the fire, children's voices in the firelight, is to see the first humans as they truly were, warmly, fully alive. The first humans shared what they had, and survival depended on it. In the world of the first humans, sharing was not a virtue, but a necessity, woven into the heart of their way of life. A hunter who brought down a large animal could not eat it all, so the meat was shared throughout the band, and in turn, when that hunter had no luck, others shared with them. Food, knowledge, tools, and care all flowed between people, binding them together and smoothing out the dangers of hard times. This deep habit of sharing and reciprocity may be one of the oldest roots of human kindness and cooperation. A band that shared survived. One that did not, did not. To imagine the day's food being divided among an ancient band, each person receiving their portion, the strong providing for the weak and the lucky for the unlucky, is to see generosity not as a luxury, but as the very foundation of human society, ancient as our kind. The first humans changed the world more gently and slowly than we do. For the vast span of their existence, the first humans lived lightly upon the earth, taking what they needed and moving on, their numbers small and their tools simple. They certainly shaped their world, with fire, with hunting, with the gathering of plants. But they did so slowly, across ages, in rhythm with the seasons and the land. Their way of life endured sustainably for far longer than our own settled civilization has yet existed. There is a kind of wisdom in that long, patient balance with nature, lived not by choice of philosophy, but by the very shape of their lives. To consider how lightly and how long the first humans lived within the living world, moving quietly through it for hundreds of thousands of years, is to glimpse a gentler relationship with the earth, very old and very deep, that lies somewhere far back in the memory of our kind. The deep past of the first humans is still being uncovered today. The story of the first humans is far from finished, for it is still being written slowly by patient discovery. Every year, somewhere in the world, a new find reshapes what we know. An older tool, an unexpected bone, a new kind of human, a cave of paintings never seen before. Whole peoples, like the Denisovans, have come to light only recently, and surprises surely still await us in the earth. The map of the human past grows clearer and richer with each careful excavation, each new method of study. We are, in a sense, still meeting our ancestors for the first time. To consider that the deep human story is not a closed book, but a living field of discovery, with new chapters of our own beginnings still waiting to be found beneath the ground, is to feel the deep past as something alive, drawing nearer to us, gently, with every passing year. The first humans gave us the gift of being human itself. When we tally all that the first humans began, the list is simply the list of what it means to be human. They gave us fire and tools, language and stories, art and music, the burial of our dead and the care of our sick, the love of beauty and the asking of great questions, the sharing of food and the warmth of the gathered band. They did not merely survive. They built, slowly and together, the very foundations of human life, which we still live upon today. Everything that follows, all of history, all of civilization, rests upon what they began in the deep and quiet dawn. To feel grateful to them is fitting, these unknown ancestors who, with patient hands and wondering minds, made us what we are. The first humans are the authors of the first and deepest chapter of the human story, and we are still living in the book they began. And so the story of the first humans is not really over. It lives on in us tonight. The fires they lit still burn, in a sense, in every hearth and lamp. The words they first spoke flow on in every language. The care they showed one another lives in every act of human kindness. We are the children of the first humans, the latest to carry their long inheritance forward. And one day we too will pass it on. Across the unthinkable gulf of time, we are joined to them by an unbroken thread of life, of love, of learning handed down. The same moon that shone on their fires shines on us now. The same wonder that filled their minds beneath the ancient stars fills ours. Their story and our story are one long story still being told. And so, as the fire burns low tonight, we rest within that great and gentle continuity, held in the long, warm circle of the human family, from the first dawn until now. Tonight we travel together to the long, quiet dawn of our own kind. We watched the first fires kindled against the dark, saw hands learning to shape stone, and followed small, brave bands as they spread across grasslands and shores to nearly every corner of the world. We stood before handprints pressed on cave walls and herds painted by lamplight, glimpsed an ancient parent carrying a child to safety, and felt the tenderness of those who buried their dead with flowers and beads. And through it all ran the deep truth that they were us, fully human, laughing and loving and wondering beneath the same moon. There is nothing left now to learn or to do. When you are ready, another quiet journey will be waiting here for you, ready to carry you gently onward into another evening. If these calm hours help you rest, a soft follow helps other tired minds find this gentle place too. But for now, let it all grow soft and dim. Let your breathing slow, and let the long ages settle around you like warmth from a low fire. You're held within a family older than memory, and it has kept watch through every night since the first. Rest well, and sweet dreams.